see. Shalom, shalom. Hold up a second. Let me see what I can do. I gotta edit some stuff right quick. I can't edit nothing that I was trying to edit. All right, well, I'll get it after. I'll change the thumbnail. But shalom, shalom. Hello, hello. Welcome back to the next session of Reading with SHILO. Man, we in here tonight. We're trying to finish up chapter 6 and begin chapter 7 of On the Real Side by Mel Watkins. History of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock. And we're moving right along, man. We're moving along great. Outside of the stumbling of words and things of that nature, we still moving right along, people. Yeah, we're in section 6 tonight. And section 6 isn't that long. So with section 6 not being that long, I'm going to finish section 6 and we're going to hop right into that chapter 7. Ooh, something in my ice water. You better not let me find you, 'cause you won't be in there long. Come on, what is in here? Some skidamarinky dink in there. I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna get it. But where is that? Yeah. Well, I hope you're ready. I'm ready. To finish off, man, chapter 6, the new Negro. The new Negro. And then chapter 7 will be radio and early television, racial ventriloquy, black soaps, and servants. All right, let's jump into it so we can go ahead and get it done. This is going to be about I'll try to shoot for a 45-minute read. 45 minutes. It might even be an hour. We'll see. We'll see. But hey, for right now, we're going to just go ahead and we're going to get it, man. We're going to get it. Section 6. Stephen Fetching remains a seminal figure in the history of Black American comedy, both as performer and as symbol of the distorted caricatures of Blacks promoted by movies. But when his screen performances are compared with portrayals of servants by other Blacks during the 30s and early 40s, it is difficult to hold that his roles were any more demeaning or degrading than those of his contemporaries. Now, Hattie McDaniel, for instance, despite the acerbic one-liners and the dominant personality projected in many of her roles, primarily represented a typical Aunt Jemima figure. In her obsessional commitment to her employers, her usually scathy treatment of Black men, and quaint pancake package appearance, she mirrored, or some would argue established, many of the era's prominent stereotypes of Black women. Finally, her screen characters were seemingly always more concerned with the welfare of whites than with other Blacks. Chosen because of his resemblance to Stephen Fetching, initially, Willie Best was merely a clone whose somnolent, let's see what that is. Somnolent. I saw it yesterday, and I kind of skipped over it. Somnolent demeanor. Let's see what it is. Somnolent. S-O-L. Did I write it down yesterday? No, I didn't. S-O-M-N-O-L-E-N-T. Somnolent. That's what I think it is. Let's go to Google search. Man, we only 5 minutes in. I got to look up a word. But that's all right. Whatever words I don't know or I may need to know, somnolent, I will look them up. I had it right. Somnolent, sleepy or drowsy. Somnolent. His whose sleepy or drowsy demeanor, his somnolent demeanor was carefully molded by the studio. Often billed as Eat and Sleep, he shuffled through a score of movies, outrunning an even greater number of spoofs. Some of his roles reached levels of banality that Fetchin could not have even imagined. Butterfly McQueen was also as otherworldly, obtuse, and inept as Fetchin in films. In fact, her whimpering, distraught maid caricature was the distaff side of his whining. Befumbled houseboy, befuddled, befuddled. The roles played by Fred Snowflake Toombs are probably best indicated by the sobriquet with which he was identified in film credits. Numerous others prominent performers, including Bill Robinson and Matt Moreland, who struggled to gain a foothold in the film industry, might easily have been cast as the symbol of demeaning black stereotypes in Hollywood films. Now, after all, as Ralph Cooper wrote, if you don't want to mug wide eyed and scared and act a fool, there was no room for you in the big studios. Still, Fetchin's selection as the most reprehensible symbol was not entirely gratuitous. His drive, ambition, and aggression, not to mention his ego and flair for publicity, had made him the most recognizable and widely discussed of all the black performers who had played Coon and Tom roles during the 20s and 30s. Although many of the claims he made when later striking out against his critics were grossly exaggerated, as he insistently professed he had been the first black film star. By his mere presence, he did open up doors for future performers, and moreover, he firmly believed in his ascendancy. During the first half of the 20th century, movie stars were larger than life figures. They were more than mere idols, having been elevated almost to the status of royalty by a fawning public desperate for heroes. Now, Fetchin basked in his celebrity, demanding and generally receiving the special treatment accorded cultural icons. Given the nature of black roles in Hollywood films during the period, however, that position brought as much notoriety as glamour and celebrity. Ultimately, it made him the natural choice as symbol of the reprehensible images of blacks that mainstream films projected. What Fetchin's critics ignore is that he was also among the era's most talented actors and comedians. The denigrative aspects of his performances accrued more from context than from content. Fetchin's stage darky was never as articulate or philosophical as Williams' comic Negro. That is, he seldom overtly revealed the ironic thrust or underlining impetus for the character's largardness. But among black audiences in all black settings, the running inside gag was instantly recognized and was a continual source of humor. In the independently produced black cast film Miracle in Harlem in 1948, for instance, Fetchin plays a role that, although more subtly rendered, is identical in nearly every external gesture to that part he had played in studio projects the previous decade. The most obvious and notable difference is the absence of whites, but that difference is crucial. As Swifty, an employee of the black owners of the candy store, he displays all of the usual comic ineptitude. He stumbles through his chores, removes his hat to deliberately massage his head, or mumbles incoherently as he attempts to unravel the simplest equation or complete the most ordinary tasks. This shuffling, stammering, incompetent as played for all its comic worth, but in an entirely black setting, Fetchin comes across purely as comedian. The cryptic, often ominous, Racial overtones of his graphic interpretation of the malingering black have almost disappeared. Instead, we see the clown and actor starkly, as he intends, unsullied by condescendence or defensiveness. We focus on the precisely controlled exaggeration and carefully orchestrated buffoonery, and if we look closely, recognize that the humor flows from the disparity between Fetchin's awkward, dense behavior and our own sense of normal behavior in the situation. The skillfully created sense of incongruity. He is a comedian, not an ethnic symbol. We laugh at his ineptitude, even feel a sense of superiority. But we also glimpse that, well, total dedication to work may not be all it's put up to be. The shady influence of race is removed, and with it, nearly all the unwarranted overtones of denigrative stereotypes. In one scene, Fetchin has the following exchange with the black detective. This the place that I'm looking for. Headquarters, man? What do you want? Well, you see, I suppose to know what I want. Sit down. I'll put my hat here to myself. Uh, I suppose, what are you so nervous about? I ain't exactly nervous. I just generally falls to pieces around polices. It's much more worse than nervous, Captain, oh, Your Honor. Lieutenant, not Your Honor. Well, Lieutenant, not Your Honor, the law generally is and usually ain't. Later, when the detective questions Fetchin about a murder, deftly avoids the inquiry, and we see how he supposed obtuseness was often used as a diversion. Lieutenant, what do you know about handling a knife? I know lots about a knife, but I ain't gonna tell you. But I know I can't eat my mashed potatoes without a knife. Stop the foolishness. I ain't fooling, mister, cause I have to have a fork for everything to eat. If I can't fork it, I just don't bother with it myself. This type of manipulative diversion and deceit, revealed as wit by the allusion to the time-worn, off-colored rejoinder to the end, was central to Fetchin's humor. And in black films or on stage before black audiences, it appeared regularly. Although it never quite duplicated the satiric edge seen in some of the Pompeii or Old John stories, it was a derivative of traditional slave humor in which the victim or underdog outwits or at least confuses his adversary and escapes punishment. Finally, Stephen Fetchin was a much better actor and comedian and a far more complicated person than his Hollywood persona and the negative dismissal by later day critics suggests. He had clawed his way to the top using the few tactics at the disposal of blacks in the early 20th century: subterfuge, deceit, and the appearance of accommodation to mainstream America's rigid conception of African Americans' true nature. His achievement as a performer, however, was ultimately his undoing. Somewhere along the way, cinema fantasy and social reality merged, and because of the indelible nature of his portrayal, Fetchin established a cinema type as his own. For most people, he became an obsequious clown that he portrayed. In many ways, Fetchin's career, his accent, and demise was a microcosm of the black experience in general during the first half of the 20th century. In most mainstream movies, black performers served merely as stooges, the dark contrast that illuminated what was otherwise and rather dull existence. As in a satiric paint factory scene of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, where the nameless hero discovers that the addition of a few drops of black liquid to cans containing a milky brown substance is used to create a perfect optic white, the purest white that can be found. blacks were often used to delineate the ideal image of the white world in muddled, second-rate films. Now, Fetching and other black performers who were restricted to distorted, stereotype roles finally provided the downside to American Dream, the essential contrast to give it form. Without doubt, the image of blacks during this period was distorted and demeaning, in many instances, irredeemably. But subterfuge and playing the fool were indispensable tactics for blacks before the mid 20th century. To ignore this point is a questionable attempt to conceal a rich and ingenious part of the African American heritage. Shrewd humility, as pundits had pointed out, can be as effective as vainglorious confrontation. To disclaim this facet of black expression, in effect, is to deny the tears, the laughter, and ultimate transcendence of many generations. And moreover, by the 70s, psychiatrists would point out that the foot shuffling, head scratching, slow moving tactic had struck at the heart of the system, and that Sambo may well have been the first militant. Fetching's comedy, Flip Wilson shrewdly observed, was funny. It was good. Everything is right for its time. His humor would only be insulting if we were uptight. For whatever degree of insult you might see in it, it is still a very, very vital part of our history. You have to accept it as a fact. Genuine African American humor derived from black simultaneous perception of themselves from both positive blacks and negative non-black viewpoints. But with the exception of some irreverent wisecracks, almost none of the former reached the screen. Instead, motion pictures focused on the self-denunciation implicit in the latter. Now, Hollywood ignored not only most overt examples of genuine folk humor, but also the psychological framework from which it may have sprung. As protests over the demeaning public image of blacks by the civil rights organizations and newspapers increased in the 40s, questions about Hollywood's ignominious comic portraits of African Americans subsided. Black actors such as Spencer Williams and Clarence Muse, and leaders such as the NAACP's Walter White, who, with Wendell Willkie, the defeated Republican presidential candidate of 1940, met the studio heads in 1942, pressed for more serious, liberalized depictions of blacks in motion pictures. Excuse me, I'm stumbling right now. On accord was reached, and studios began gradually phasing out the more obviously disparaging comic stereotypes. Although the apparent accord did not spawn overnight changes and, in fact, gave rise to many disputes over exactly what the proper black image was. A tangible benefit was the production of 2 black cast musicals that enlisted the talents of some of African Americans' best performers. Now, the MGM's Cabin in the Sky and 20th Century Fox's Stormy Weather were both released in 1943. These 2 movies spotlighted an array of music and comedy stars seldom seen in motion pictures, and more surprisingly, placed them sparingly in 20th century environments. Cabin in the Sky, like The Green Pastures, is based on a successful Broadway play and places ordinary black life in the thoroughly make-believe setting. Here, the forces of heaven and hell are not to claim the soul of Joe Jackson, an average working man, but unlike its more serious, pious forerunner, Cabin is concerned with secular entertainment rather than with biblical allegory. The plot, which has Lucifer's henchmen, Louis Armstrong, Rhett Ingram, Manton Moreland, and Wiley Best, devising a scheme to lure black everyman, Little Joe, Eddie Anderson, away from his dedicated wife, Ethel Waters, with the temptation of money and a sexy enchantress, Lena Horne, is little more than a scaffold for the series of dazzling dance and musical sequences. Now, Anderson and Waters are the only characters who rise above obvious caricature, in addition to some affecting and exciting song and dance numbers. They invest their dramatic scenes with a touch of reality and display a convincing, if limited, range of emotions despite the corny dialogue. But this motion picture is finally about entertainment, and the all star cast delivers its non stop throughout the film. Among highlights too numerous to enumerate, show stopping ballads by Waters and Horn, dances by Anderson, Waters, and the inimitable loop masters of tap dance. The music by Duke Ellington and the Hall Johnson Choir all contribute to what amounts to a dream sequence variety show featuring much of the best black talent available in the 40s. Although set in a rural community, the movie usually avoids the maudlin nostalgia and grosser stereotypes ordinarily associated with major studios' portrayal of black country folk. Strangely, however, comedy is muted in this film, except for a few scenes. One in which the devil punkish disciples muse about their part in turning the apple into man's first temptation and the invention of such enduring human nemesis as flies. Another in which Waters outwits would-be hustlers Nicodemus Stewart and Ernest Whitman in a crap game. The movie avoids straight-out comedy. Instead, it is propelled by high spirits and an infectious energy that generally elicits smiles rather than laughter. Now, Stormy Weather, on the other hand, is embellished throughout by the type of comedy that was rarely seen outside black honky tonks, variety shows, theaters, and other race movies. Although supposedly based on the lives of black entertainers, Jim Europe and Noble Sissel, the story barely touches on them, centering instead on a romance between Bill Robinson, essentially portraying himself, and Lena Horne. No matter, the storyline and ersatz, what is that? What is a ersatz? Ersatz. 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 Do you know what an ersatz is? See even if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Let's see. ERSATZ. Ersatz.
Ersatz.
Ersatz. Ersatz of a product made or used as a substitute. The storyline and substitute romance are not really important. The storyline and ersatz, the storyline and ersatz romance are not really important here. As in Cabin, the film's real attraction is the parade of black entertainers who literally light up the screen. Horn, Robinson, the Nicholas brothers, Abba Brown, and Catherine Dunham Troop, Cab Calloway, and Fats Waller all contribute sparkling musical or dance performances. But the movie is also notable for its hip, urban ambiance and the humor that flows from the overriding spirit. Nicodemus Stewart contributes a controlled, urban version of his slow talking darky character, which, without the usual rural dialect and broad gestures, has a tame, muted quality. Now, Flournoy, Miller does his famous indefinite talk routine with sidekick Johnny Lee. Although their blackface makeup may offend some, the bit offers a genuine example of black stage humor rarely presented in mainstream movies. But The funniest and most genuine instances of true black humor arise out of the attitudes and casual patter that flow effortlessly from the cast. Now, Fat Waller's brief appearance provides some of the film's most hilarious moments. The ad libs with which he punctuates Albert Brown's version of the blues song, Ain't That Right, for instance, are priceless. Baby, baby, what's the matter with you? Brown asks, and Waller shoots back with famous reprise. One never knows, do one? One never knows, do one? And to Brown's refrain, you got the world in a jug. Waller responds, yeah, but where's the stopper? The quips continue throughout the song, with Waller topping each of the singer's complaints. A, tell them fools anything but tell me the truth. And baby, I was born balling, and I'm gonna ball the rest of my life. A beef to me, woman, beef to me. I don't like no pork no how. Or finally, suffer, suffer, excess baggage, suffer. Now, Waller and others were able to project a more realistic sense of black humor in stormy weather because the film had a contemporary setting and most of the characters, unhampered by rural masks, were actually playing themselves. In essence, the new Negro, or at least a hip comic version of that transplanted city dweller, had finally come to the screen. The arrival made for some delightful entertainment and revealing humor. In addition to black cast films, the 40s saw the release of Casablanca, in which Arthur Dooley Wilson, who appeared in Stormy Weather, co-starred with Humphrey Bogart in the now legendary role of Sam, pianist and nightclub co-owner, as well as such notable issue-oriented films as In This Our Life, Home of the Brave, Intruder in the Dust, Lost Boundaries, and Pinky. In Hollywood, then and the end of an era had been reached. But breaking old habits was not easy, either before or behind the camera scenes. While filming Cabin, for instance, the cast was forced to eat in Louis B. Mayer's private dining room to avoid challenging the color bar in the MGM commissary. Still, an attempt to present blacks in a more equitable light was being made. Yet, whether out of timidity or white directors and producers' unfamiliarity with black life, the characters portrayed in most 40 films would function more as symbols of social problems than fully realized people. Now, later, Ralph Ellison wrote that as an antidote to sentimentality, these films should be seen as predominantly Negro audiences, since when the action goes funny or phony, one will hear derisive laughter, not sobs. Intruder in the Dust is the only film that could be shown in Harlem without arousing in unintended laughter. For a time, however, intentional comic portraits of blacks and black comedians would virtually disappear from mainstream motion pictures. Of course, motion pictures were not only the whole story. On radio, a less visible but arguably more intimate public arena, and the early 20th century's other influential new medium, traditional comic caricatures of Negroes would not only survive but reach new heights of popularity and often distortion. And that was section 6. That was the end of chapter 6, section 6. We're going to start chapter 7. Oh, I see ya. Chapter 7, Radio and Early Television. There you go. Get out of there. Something in my water. It might be a little bug. Chapter 7, Radio and Early Television. Racial ventriloquy, black soaps, and servants. These are the pictures. Amos and Andy and Rochester. Or Rochester. We're only going to read section 1. Radio was the most all-encompassing, all-pervading, and all-powerful entity to invade the public consciousness in the 1930s. Robert Hyde and John Gilman. Jack, oh Rochester. Yes, sir, boss. Did you lay out my full dress suit? No, the black one with the tails. You've been pressing the pants for an hour. Are you done yet? Yes, sir. Days is done to a crisp. The Jello program. The TV industry avoided even the pretense of maturity regarding racial matters. Racism was both disseminated and encouraged by the medium. It was easy for TV producers to imagine a world without blacks. Douglas T. Miller and Marion Nowalk. Section 1. With little or no fanfare, commercially licensed radio was introduced in America on November 2nd of 1920, replacing the amateur broadcast that had been received on crystal sets since the late teens. Initially, its impact was slight. Low budgets and inadequate facilities restricted programming, so that information or news shows and music provided by local bands predominated. But it soon became apparent that the potential of the new electronic medium was virtually unlimited. But by the end of 1922, there were 576 licensed stations, and radio sales increased by 1 million in 1920 to 400 million in 1925. Ooh, what a jump. With the National Broadcasting Company's premier network broadcast on November 15th of 1926 and Columbia Broadcasting System's debut in September of 1928, radio had arrived as a formidable influence in the nation's cultural life. By 1929, 1 of every 3 homes in America had a radio. A decade later, there was at least 1 radio in every home and 1 in most cars. Now, among the new electrical mediums, most exciting and appealing qualities was that listeners could hear concerts or comic monologues, sports events, or political speeches as they happened. Live broadcasts transported audiences from their living rooms or parlors to the site of the actual event, establishing a bond between listeners and disseminating a broad-based popular culture that all Americans could enjoy. In addition, radio could reach a much larger audience than movies, and was more intimate. Listeners who could not afford to take their families to a theater or auditorium could sit in the privacy of their own homes with friends and enjoy a wide range of entertainment. Moreover, lacking visual images, radio forced listeners to use their imaginations. It required a level of participation that was unnecessary when watching motion pictures or later television, and thereby produced a subjective intensity that was often missing from other entertainment media. Although it is difficult in our age of multimedia assault to image radio as anything more than an outlet for top 10 recordings and slick rabble-rousing talk show hosts, during its peak in the 30s and 40s, it was the nation's most influential, popular entertainment and cultural medium. The impact of the live account of the Hindenburg's explosion in Lakehurst, New Jersey in 1937, and the general panic that swept the eastern seaboard and parts of the Midwest and South in October of 1938, when Orson Welles' Mercury Theater on the air presentation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds was mistaken for an actual report of a Martian invasion, demonstrated radio's persuasive power and its intense dramatic possibilities. Now, comedy, however, did not immediately emerge as a key ingredient in radio. Many stage comics, accustomed to live audiences and the use of visual gags and props, were skeptical about performing for silent, unseen, and unknown listeners. As late as 1932, Seasoned comedians like Bob Hope still reacted anxiously to radio appearances. It all seems strange, Hope said of an engagement on Rudy Vale's Fleischman Hour, talking into a microphone in a studio instead of playing in front of a real audience. I was nervous on those first radio shows, and the valet engineers couldn't figure out why they heard a thumping noise when I did my routines until they found out I was kicking the mic after every joke. Others avoided the new medium because variety shows and vaudeville producers objected to having their acts appearing on radio or in movies. In fact, many Broadway performers initially displayed the same snobbish attitude towards radio that they had to motion pictures. Gradually, however, casual humorous patter became a part of most radio programming. Certain members of radio orchestras on local stations, in order to enliven their programs, started to toss impromptu jokes back and forth. Arthur Frank Wetherham writes in radio comedy, these musicians were among the airwaves' first gestures. Station announcers facilitated the use of humor on the air by pirating jokes from popular magazines such as Judge, College Humor, and Whiz Bang. Now, quips and gags were also lifted from Madison's Budget, a compilation of gags, routines, and monologues published annually from 1898 to 1921 by the former vaudeville star James Madison. These gags used to pad and fill out program schedules were generally standard vaudeville fare, such as, I heard your mother-in-law was dangerously sick. Yes, but now she's dangerously well again. I quit because the boss used repulsive language. What did he say? He said, you're fired. Sir, I didn't think I deserved a 0 on this exam. You didn't, but it's the lowest grade I could give. Am I tired? I've been running around all day trying to get something from my wife. Had any offer yet? But the humor most frequently heard on early radio was provided by song and comedy patter teams. Through the mid 20s, these teams, usually small-time vaudeville acts, provided a steady flow of popular song and amiable chatter. Entertainment on early radio then lacked its own distinct character. It depended largely on humorous patter, mainly comprised of tired, one-line vaudeville gags and either live broadcast of dance bands or the unconscious music created by local musicians. For African Americans, radio filled the well-trodden course established by mainstream theaters and motion pictures. Again, there was almost no acknowledgement of the ferment in urban centers of the Harlem Renaissance of Black struggle for equality or of the repressive measures amassed against the struggle. Radio, like the movies, largely projected the let's look it up. Anachronistic, I think that's how you pronounce it. Projected the anachronistic, ANACHRONISTIC, anachronistic. Let's see what it is, and if I'm even pronouncing it correctly. Anachronistic. ANACHRO Anna CHRONIS anachronistic. Anachronistic. Belonging to a period other than that being portrayed. Radio, like the movies, largely projected an anachronistic or largely projected a period other than what was being portrayed, or largely projected an anachronistic 19th century portrait of Black life. With the exception of guest appearances by musicians, Blacks were initially ignored. Later, they were burlesqued, imitated, and finally allocated supportive comedy roles as domestics. Little less changed until after World War II. And since the earliest radio stations concentrated on news and information broadcasts, serious pursuits assumed to be beyond the entrance or comprehension of former slaves. It was not surprising that Black Americans were not initially enlisted. African Americans would be generally excluded from mainstream journalism until the 60s civil rights disturbances. Still, since music was integral to the success of the new medium, Black musicians were included in broadcasts from clubs and theaters on local stations in the mid 20s and continued to appear sporadically as guest artists on variety shows in subsequent years. The acclaimed jazz pianist and composer Fats Waller, for instance, was first heard on the broadcast from Newark's Fox Terminal Theater in 1923. By the 30s, he had made occasional appearances on other local shows and had been featured on network programs such as Paramount on Parade and Radio Roundup, where he played, sang, and inserted sassy jibes at the lyrics. His own show had a short run on CBS. Also in 1923, Kid Ory was broadcasting classic New Orleans jazz from Los Angeles. The Trixie Smith and Fletcher Henderson were broadcasting the blues from New York. During the mid 20s, according to Louis Armstrong's biography, James Lincoln Collier, Clarence Williams, Henderson, Ellington, and others were broadcasting regularly, sometimes every night or even twice a night, from major nightclubs, hotels, and dance halls. There was more good jazz on radio in New York during the 20s than there is today. And jazz was not the only Black music provided. In 1924, the Hampton Institute Choir was appearing on stations in New York City. And in the late 1920s, Black musical performers like Noble Sissle, Fess Williams, and Pace Jubilee Negro singers were heard on the air. Still, appearances by Waller, Henderson, Ellington, Armstrong, and other legendary Black musicians, such as Count Basie, Chick Webb, Will Valdery, Don Redman, Earl Father Hines, and Cab Calloway, were minuscule when compared with the enormous amount of time allotted to music on early radio. Swing or big band dance music was in demand, and jazz popularizers such as Paul Whiteman. Now, Guy Lombardo and Al Goodman, along with swing bands led by Ozzie Nelson, Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, and Kay Kaiser, would become radio best known orchestra leaders. By the 30s, Art Tatum, Duke Ellington, Noble Sissle, Louis Armstrong, Bob Howard, Adele Hall, the Millers Brothers, and the Ink Spots had all had brief runs at their own series, and stars such as Paul Robeson, Ethel Waters, Nina Mae McKinney, Cab Calloway, and Bill Robinson were among the guests on network programs. In the 40s, Black musicians and singers made further inroads on the radio, and in addition to numerous guest appearances by stars like Billie Holiday, performers such as Louis Jordan and his Timpani Five, Cab Calloway, and Nat King Cole would host their own shows. Still, whenever possible, performers' ethnic origins went unrevealed. Radio editors had a tacit agreement not to publish pictures of Black radio artists, no matter how successful or popular they became. Indeed, following a pattern established by minstrelsy and blackface actors on the stage and screen, whites played Negro roles in nearly all of the early radio shows. In the beginning, When programs were not broadcast before a live audience, this new electronic medium made the pretense much easier. The deception depended entirely on mimicking Black dialect and intonation. Thus, radio had introduced the new phenomenon, racial ventriloquy. Since early radio generally eschewed drama in favor of light, wholesome entertainment for family audiences, mimicry of blacks was most often put to comic use. Consequently, for a time, radio extended the careers of many minstrel comedians whose popularity on stage had nearly reached its nadir. During the mid 20s, minstrel style shows were common in both local and network stations. The Everyday Hour, which premiered on New York's WEAF in 1923 and moved to NBC in 1926, often featured Mack and Moran, who, this blackface team, also appeared on the 1928 CBS Majestic Theater Hour. In 1926, the Burnt Cork Review was broadcast in Cincinnati in WLW. Later, NBC aired the Sealy Air Minstrels in 1927 through 1928 and the Dutch Master Minstrels in 1928 through 1932. In 1928, Tess Gardler brought her blackface Aunt Jemima impersonation to radio, and the next year, George and Rufus appeared on WOV Brooklyn. Now, in the 30s, besides Showboat, which featured two blackface acts, Honey Boy and Sassafras and Molasses in January, and became the nation's top variety program in 1932, the NBC schedule featured the Sinclair Wiener Minstrels, Plantation Party, Molly Minstrels, and Minstrel Show. Among the other 30s black imitators on radio in the 30s were Moonshine and Sawdust, The Golf Show, Buck and Wheat, Aunt Jemima, Sugarfoot and Sassafras, and Anesthetic and Cerebellum, both on Portland's KGW. Watermelon and Cantaloupe, Corncob Pike Club, and WEAF, New York. Pit and Pat, portrayed by Pat Paget and Pick Malone, who also were Molasses in January, on the Dill's Best Show, and such male-female teams as Conjure and Carolina, and Emmeline and Easy, both on Skenesatady. SCHENECTADY apostrophe S. Scene. Scenic Taddies. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. Scenic Taddies, WGY. Even Gosden and Coral took time out of Amos and Andy in the late 30s to broadcast a Mystic Nights of the Sea Friday night minstrel show on WMAQ Chicago. Some are more memorable for their bizarre names than for their humor. Now, racial ventriloquy, like the antics of blackface actors on stage and in silent movies, was crucial in establishing burlesque images that black performers would later be expected to emulate. They would linger for decades, and when authentic black comedians were finally allowed access to the medium, would continue to add an absurd and hauntingly ironic footnote to black radio comedy. And that was section 1. Section 1 of chapter 7, Radio and Early Television, in the book On the Real Side by Mel Watkins. We're moving along. I made it before an hour, under an hour. Some of them words, man. What's that word? Anachronistic. Ersatz. Somnolent. Yeah, some of them words was catching me. They were catching me. But we pushed through. We pushed through the end of chapter 6, section 6. We knocked that out the way. And we knocked out the beginning of chapter 7 out the way. So we moving right along. Right along. Good pace. Good pace tonight. Thought I read decently. But we'll keep pushing, man. One word at a time. One page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time till we finish the book. And on to the next. See what we can learn and grow from. Hopefully it was something you can learn and grow from what was read. Definitely the elimination of authentic depictions of who these great performers were from the radio and in any type of media. You know, that stuff is still seen today. It's no different. Yeah, it was easier back then. What shadow banning, what we would call it today, shadow banning. They were shadow banning people back then, or at least that's what it seems like to me. Don't seem no different, man. The ones who are in charge of the mediums, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, whatever, Instagram, they are, shadow banning a lot of people. They are holding the keys to whether or not some people will be seen. What they say, if it's in the algorithm, it needs to be in the algorithm, because if it ain't in the algorithm, then you might come up missing. You might come up missing. But like I said, man, we're gonna keep pushing on. We're gonna keep pushing on. That was on the real side. Chapter 6, we finished it and started chapter 7. So we'll come back, Lord willing, tomorrow or the next session. We'll come back and we'll jump into section 2. Let me see how long it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About 5.5 pages. So the next session, it'll be about, look, we should get it under an hour. We should have it under an hour. But until then, man, I hope everybody that catches this on the back end, I hope you enjoy it. Like, comment, subscribe, tell your people about it, man. Maybe somebody might want to learn something about some of these books. Oh, Shalom, Spiritual Conversations. I don't know if you just getting in, but we finished. We done for the night. We done for the night. I'm glad you popped up. But for those who will catch it on the back end, man, like, definitely comment on the video. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you think about the things you have heard, if you took the time to listen to them. Did you grasp something? What can you learn and grow from within the chapters, the pages, the portions, sections, and the words that are being read to you? Let me know, man. Let's get this thing jumping and moving. And we'll keep pushing for the channel to keep growing and going, man. So, shalom, everybody. Until next time. Man, y'all make me, these 3 people in here make me want to keep going. But till next time, man. SHILO out. SHILO out. Damn, I want to keep going. Shit.